Maybe it's time you stop treating Daniel like he's still your husband, my daughter-in-law said with a smile over dessert, and my son just sat there, staring at his plate like those words hadn't shattered something inside me. The rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows that night, steady and cold, while the smell of rosemary chicken still lingered in the warm air between us. I remember every detail because pain has a strange way of preserving moments you wish you could forget. The candles on the dining table had burned halfway down. Nicole's wine glass left pale rings against the polished oak surface I'd spent 20 years protecting from scratches and stains. Daniel sat beside her in a navy sweater I bought him last Christmas, the sleeves pushed up the same way he used to wear them when he was a teenager studying late at night at this very table. But somehow, he looked like a stranger now. I didn't mean anything by it, Nicole added lightly, cutting into her cheesecake with delicate little movements. Her blonde hair fell perfectly over one shoulder, and her voice carried that calm sweetness that always sounded polite to everyone else. Everyone except me. I forced a smile anyway. Of course, I whispered. I know, but I didn't know. Not really, because somewhere over the last few years, I had stopped understanding my own son. The old Daniel would have laughed nervously and changed the subject. The old Daniel would have reached for my hand under the table and said, "Mom, don't listen to her." But this Daniel stayed silent. He glanced at Nicole first before answering anything now. He measured every reaction carefully, like he was afraid of upsetting her. And maybe he was. "Mom," he finally sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Nicole just thinks we need healthier boundaries." Boundaries. I hated that word immediately. It sounded clinical. Cold. Like something a therapist says before teaching your child how to slowly remove you from their life without feeling guilty about it. I looked down at my coffee cup because suddenly I couldn't trust my own expression. My reflection trembled faintly in the dark liquid. 70 years old, and somehow I felt like a little girl being told she wasn't welcome anymore. "I only come by on Sundays," I said quietly. "And only for dinner." Nicole gave a tiny shrug. Exactly. The room went still after that. Not dramatic stillness, not shouting or slamming doors. Worse. The kind where everyone pretends nothing terrible just happened because acknowledging it would make it real. Outside, headlights slid across the wet street beyond the kitchen window. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly through the neighborhood. Daniel cleared his throat and reached for his water glass. "We just need more time alone as a married couple," he explained carefully. "Work's been stressful lately." I nodded slowly, even though my chest felt tight. I wanted to ask him since when spending Sunday dinner with his mother became such a burden. I wanted to remind him that after his father died, these dinners were the only thing keeping this house from feeling completely empty. But I already knew how the conversation would go. Nicole would smile patiently. Daniel would look exhausted. And somehow, I would become the problem again. So instead, I stood up quietly and began gathering plates from the table. "You don't have to clean up right now," Daniel said without looking at me. Funny how children stop noticing your silence once they grow older. When he was 5 years old, he could tell something was wrong just by the way I folded laundry. Now, he couldn't see the grief sitting directly across from him. "I don't mind," I said softly. The kitchen's sink filled with warm water while their voices faded into a low conversation behind me. I caught fragments here and there. Work schedules, weekend plans, a couple's trip to Napa next month. Things I apparently no longer belonged inside of. I stared out the window while rinsing dishes, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory carrying me through motions I'd repeated thousands of times over a lifetime of motherhood. Wash, rinse, dry, repeat. That's what motherhood had always been for me. Quiet repetition. Packing lunches before sunrise. Waiting in freezing parking lots after basketball practice. Sitting beside hospital beds during childhood fevers. Loving someone steadily for decades, even when they stopped noticing. "Mom," Daniel's voice startled me slightly. I turned around too quickly, water dripping from my fingers. He stood near the doorway now while Nicole scrolled through her phone by the coat rack. "You okay?" he asked. Such a small question. So painfully late. I smiled automatically. Of course. He hesitated for half a second, like maybe he wanted to say more. Then Nicole looked up. Daniel, we should probably head out before the roads get worse. And just like that, the moment disappeared. He grabbed his car keys from the counter. Drive safe tomorrow if the storm keeps up, he told me while slipping on his coat. I almost laughed at that. Drive safe. As if the dangerous thing in my life was the weather outside instead of the silence growing between us inside this house. Nicole kissed my cheek lightly before leaving. Her perfume smelled expensive and floral. We'll call you sometime this week, she said warmly. But we all knew they probably wouldn't. The front door closed softly behind them a few seconds later. Then came the familiar sound of tires pulling away from the curb. And suddenly, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. I stood alone in the kitchen holding a damp dish towel, while the grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily in the background. Tick, tick, tick. Funny how loneliness has a sound once you start listening closely enough. I walked slowly into the dining room afterward. 3 wine glasses still sat on the table beneath the soft amber light overhead. Nicole's lipstick mark remained on the rim of one glass. Daniel's napkin was crumpled beside his plate exactly the way he always left it growing up. For a second, I could almost see the little boy he used to be. 8 years old. Missing front tooth. Running into the kitchen after school yelling, "Mom, guess what happened today?" Back then, I was his safe place. His first phone call. His favorite person. Somewhere along the way, I became an obligation instead. I lowered myself carefully into my chair at the head of the table. My knees ached more these days, especially during storms. The silence wrapped around me heavily while rain continued tapping against the windows. Then my eyes drifted toward the framed family photo sitting near the fireplace. It was taken 5 years ago at Daniel and Nicole's wedding. Before everything started changing. Before every holiday became a negotiation. Before Nicole started using words like boundaries and emotional dependence whenever I asked my own son to visit more than once a month. In the photo, Daniel's arm wrapped protectively around my shoulders. He looked proud standing beside me. Happy. I reached for the frame slowly. My fingers traced his smiling face beneath the glass. "When did I lose you?" I whispered before I could stop myself. The room gave no answer. Only the rain. Only the clock. Only the terrible feeling growing quietly inside me that maybe Nicole wasn't the real reason my son was slipping away. Maybe the truth was worse. Maybe Daniel had already chosen her a long time ago, and I had simply been the last person to notice. The next Sunday felt wrong from the moment I opened my eyes. Morning light spilled softly through the bedroom curtains, pale and gray after the storm, stretching long shadows across the quilt Harold and I bought during our 25th anniversary trip to Vermont. The house creaked quietly around me, settling into another cold November morning, and for a few seconds I forgot everything that happened at dinner the week before. Then reality returned all at once, heavy and familiar. I lay there listening for my phone, listening for the small vibration of a message. Maybe Daniel would text this morning. Maybe he would apologize. Maybe he would say Nicole had overreacted and that none of it was what he really meant. But the room stayed silent except for the hum of the heater kicking on downstairs. I reached toward the nightstand slowly and checked my phone anyway. Nothing. No missed calls. No messages. Not even one of those quick little thumbs-up reactions people send when they do not care enough to type actual words. I stared at the screen longer than I should have before setting it face down beside the lamp. At 67 years old, I hated how much emotional power one tiny device still had over me. Downstairs, the kitchen felt colder than usual. Thin winter sunlight filtered through the windows above the sink, turning the granite countertops pale blue in the early light. I filled the kettle with water automatically while my slippers scraped softly across the hardwood floor. Sunday mornings used to mean noise in this house. Daniel arriving early because he liked my cinnamon rolls warm from the oven. Football games playing too loudly in the living room. Nicole laughing politely back when she still pretended to enjoy being here. But lately, Sundays had become something else entirely. A ritual of waiting. I opened the refrigerator and stared at the carton of eggs, the fresh fruit, The uncooked bacon I bought Friday afternoon because some stubborn part of me still planned meals as if my family might show up hungry. Old habits survive longer than pride sometimes. The kettle whistled sharply, pulling me from my thoughts. I poured hot water into my favorite floral mug and carried it carefully toward the dining room table. Two placemats still sat there from last weekend because I had not found the energy to put them away. One for me, one for Daniel. I stood staring at them for a long moment before finally folding the second one quietly and sliding it into the drawer beside the china cabinet. Something about that small action hurt more than I expected.
Ishwa,
Just checking in. Call me when you get a chance. Sweetheart. Even after everything, I still called him sweetheart. The call ended, and silence rushed back instantly. I carried my mug into the living room afterward and sat near the large front window where the weak sunlight reached the carpet. Hands trembled anyway. The grandfather clock ticked loudly from a hallway.
tick, tick, tick.
Every sound inside the house suddenly felt sharper when there were no voices to soften them. I stood up slowly and walked into the kitchen. The bacon still sat untouched in the refrigerator. I pulled it out mechanically, stared at it for a second, then shoved it back harder than necessary. Tears threatened briefly, but I refused them. Crying felt too close to begging, and something inside me had started hardening this past week. Not anger exactly. Something quieter. Colder, like the moment a lake begins freezing over one thin, invisible layer at a time. By late afternoon, the sunlight faded early behind thick clouds, leaving the house wrapped in dim blue shadows. I turned on the small lamp beside the couch and wrapped myself in the knitted blanket Harold used during winters. It still smelled faintly like cedar after all these years. I missed him most on Sundays. Harold would have noticed all of this immediately. The distance. The careful exclusion. The subtle disrespect hidden beneath polite smiles. He used to say Daniel had too soft a heart to ever hurt me intentionally. But Harold had never lived long enough to see how easily soft hearts can be reshaped by the people lying beside them at night. Around 6 that evening, I heard laughter outside and glanced through the curtains instinctively. A young family walked down the sidewalk carrying takeout containers while their little girl skipped ahead in pink rain boots. The mother reached for the father's hand without thinking. Such a tiny gesture, but it made my chest ache unexpectedly. I used to believe family bonds were permanent things. Solid. Unbreakable. But now I was beginning to understand something painful. Families do not usually fall apart all at once. They erode slowly through unanswered calls, missed holidays, smaller invitations, shorter conversations, and quiet little compromises made in favor of someone else until one day you wake up and realize there is barely any space left for you at all. That night, before going upstairs, I stopped in front of the hallway mirror and studied my reflection carefully. Beneath the warm yellow light, silver hair, tired eyes, beige cardigan hanging loosely against thinner shoulders than I remembered having a year ago. I looked older suddenly, not physically, emotionally. Like grief had quietly settled into the lines of my face while I was busy pretending everything was fine. For a long moment, I simply stood there staring at myself. Then softly, almost too quietly to hear, I asked the woman in the mirror a question I had been avoiding for months. What if he never chooses you again? The silence that followed felt like the beginning of something I was not ready to name yet. 2 weeks passed before I saw Daniel again, and by then the silence between us had started feeling almost normal, which frightened me more than I wanted to admit. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, just before Thanksgiving. Cold sunlight poured through the grocery store windows in long pale streaks while Christmas music played too softly overhead. I was standing near the produce section comparing 2 bags of apples when I heard Nicole's voice somewhere behind me. Daniel, grab the Honeycrisp ones. Those are better for the pie. My body reacted before my mind did. I froze with my hand still resting on the shopping cart handle while my heart gave one hard, painful thud against my ribs. Then I turned slowly. They stood 3 aisles away near the bakery display. Nicole wore a cream-colored wool coat with gold buttons and knee-high boots that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Daniel stood beside her carrying 2 reusable shopping bags while staring down at his phone. He looked tired, older somehow. The sharpness around his eyes reminded me painfully of Harold during the years he worked 70-hour weeks trying to keep our business afloat. For one foolish second, relief washed through me. Maybe seeing each other unexpectedly would break whatever strange tension had grown between us. Maybe he would hug me. Maybe he would say he missed me. "Daniel," I called softly. He looked up immediately, startled. Then came that tiny pause I had started noticing lately, the half-second where he checked Nicole's reaction before responding to his own mother. It happened so fast, most people would never notice it. But mothers notice everything. Nicole turned first. "Oh, hi Evelyn," she said politely. Polite. Always polite. Like a customer service representative trained never to sound openly rude. Daniel finally smiled, though it looked strained around the edges. "Hey Mom, what are you doing here?" Such a strange question. "Grocery shopping, apparently. Just picking up a few things for Thanksgiving," I answered carefully. "What about you two?" Nicole's expression brightened instantly. "We're hosting this year." Something tightened quietly in my stomach. "Hosting?" Daniel shifted awkwardly beside her. "Yeah. Nicole's parents are flying in from Denver tomorrow morning, so we thought it would just be easier doing it at our place." Easier. Another word I had started hating lately. Everything about me seemed to have become inconvenient somehow. "That sounds lovely," I said after a moment. And I meant it at least partly. I had spent most of my life teaching Daniel to build a happy home someday. It was difficult to resent him for finally doing exactly that. But then Nicole added something else. "We're keeping it small this year. Very low stress." The words landed gently on the surface, but carried a deeper meaning underneath. Small, controlled, carefully curated. I nodded slowly, while pretending to examine apples in my cart. "Of course." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck again, the nervous habit he developed as a teenager whenever he felt guilty about something. "Mom, maybe we can stop by and see you Friday or something." Maybe. Or something. I smiled anyway, because dignity sometimes means pretending crumbs are enough when everyone can see you are starving. That would be nice. An uncomfortable silence followed. Around us, shoppers pushed carts past displays of canned pumpkin and cranberry sauce, while holiday music floated overhead about family gatherings and coming home for Christmas. I suddenly felt very old standing there under fluorescent lights, watching my own son speak to me like a distant relative he felt obligated to check in on twice a year. Nicole glanced toward the bakery section. "Daniel, we still need the rolls." He nodded immediately. "Right." Then he looked back at me. "Well, I guess we should finish up." I wanted to say something meaningful before he walked away. Something that might remind him who we used to be before every interaction started feeling negotiated through someone else. But all that came out was, "Drive safe tomorrow if the roads ice over." The exact same meaningless sentence he gave me the last time I saw him. Funny how families sometimes start speaking in weather reports when they run out of love they know how to express. Daniel leaned forward awkwardly and kissed my cheek quickly. "You too, Mom." Then they disappeared around the corner near frozen foods while Nicole talked about centerpieces and guest seating arrangements. I stood there for several seconds after they left, staring at nothing. The apples blurred slightly in front of me. Around me, the grocery store buzzed with ordinary life. A little boy begged his mother for candy near checkout lanes. An elderly couple argued affectionately over pie flavors. Somewhere a cashier laughed loudly. The whole world continued moving while I stood perfectly still inside it. That night the temperature dropped into the low 30s and freezing rain coated the streets outside my neighborhood. I sat alone in the living room wrapped in Harold's old cardigan while the local news warned drivers about icy bridges and dangerous conditions overnight. Thanksgiving had always been Harold's favorite holiday. "No pressure," he used to joke every year while carving turkey. "Just food and people pretending to like each other." Back then the house would smell like sage stuffing and cinnamon all morning long. Daniel would sneak olives from the appetizer tray before guests arrived. Football games played too loudly in the background while Harold complained nobody appreciated his mashed potatoes enough. The memories came sharper lately, almost cruel in their clarity. Around 8 that evening my phone buzzed against the couch cushion. For one hopeful second, I thought maybe Daniel had finally remembered something important. But it was my sister Lorraine calling from Arizona. You sound tired, she said immediately. After I answered, I forced a laugh.
Doi.
Evelyn, I have known you for 65 years. What is going on? I hesitated because saying things out loud makes them real in ways thinking never does. Nothing dramatic, I finally whispered. Daniel is just busy these days. Lorraine stayed quiet for a second too long. Busy or distant? The question slipped straight through me. I stared at the dark television screen reflecting my tired face back at me. I do not think Nicole likes me very much. And Daniel? She asked softly. That was the part one still could not answer honestly. Because admitting your daughter-in-law dislikes you is painful. Admitting your son allows it is something else entirely. He always takes her side now, I said quietly. Even when she says things that hurt me. Lorraine sighed heavily on the other end. Honey, some men confuse peace with loyalty. It is easier to disappoint their mothers because they assume we will forgive them anyway. Tears stung unexpectedly behind my eyes, but I blinked them away quickly. I did not raise him to become this kind of man. No, she replied gently. You raised him to be loved easily. Unfortunately, the world changes people once they start fearing conflict more than they value character. After we hung up, I sat there a long time thinking about that sentence. Fear changes people. Maybe that was what happened to Daniel. Maybe he was not cruel. Maybe he was weak. Somehow that possibility hurt even more. The next morning I woke before sunrise out of pure habit. The house felt bitterly cold despite the heater running downstairs. Gray dawn light stretched weakly across the bedroom walls while wind rattled tree branches outside. Thanksgiving Day. I lay there staring at the ceiling for several minutes before finally reaching for my phone. Nothing. No holiday message.
No invitation.
No change of plans. Just silence. I got up slowly and walked to the kitchen barefoot, the hardwood floors cold beneath my feet. Outside, frost coated the neighborhood lawns silver white beneath the early morning sky. I started coffee automatically while staring out the window. Across the street, my neighbors loaded casseroles into their car while grandchildren ran laughing across the driveway, wearing oversized coats. The little girl waved at me through the window. I waved back with a smile that disappeared the second she looked away. The coffee machine hissed softly behind me. The clock on the microwave blinked 6:14 in pale green numbers. And standing there alone in my quiet kitchen, watching other families gather while mine slowly drifted further out of reach, I finally allowed myself to wonder whether Nicole was not just creating distance between Daniel and me anymore. Maybe she was replacing me entirely. That Thanksgiving afternoon, I still cooked enough food for 6 people even though I knew no one was coming. Old instincts are difficult to kill. By noon the kitchen smelled like roasted turkey, butter, sage, and cinnamon while soft jazz music played quietly from the little speaker near the sink. Outside, thin clouds drifted slowly across a pale silver sky, and every few minutes headlights passed the house carrying families toward dinners I no longer seemed to belong inside of. I moved carefully between the stove and the counter, carrying plates that suddenly felt heavier than they used to. The house stayed painfully quiet except for the ticking clock and the occasional creak of hardwood floors beneath my slippers. Years ago, Thanksgiving mornings were loud from the moment Daniel walked through the door. He used to steal pieces of turkey before dinner while Harold pretended to scold him. 40 years old, and still acting like a raccoon in my kitchen, Harold would laugh while Daniel grinned with that same crooked smile he had since childhood. Back then, Nicole used to stand beside him wrapping napkins or asking for recipes. She called me Mom in those days. Funny how certain words disappear long before relationships officially end. Around 2 o'clock, while basting the turkey one last time, I caught myself setting out extra serving bowls automatically. One for mashed potatoes. One for cranberry sauce. One for Nicole's favorite green bean casserole recipe I had not made in over a year because she once casually mentioned it was too heavy. I stopped suddenly, with the serving spoon still in my hand. The realization hit quietly but hard. Even now, after everything, some part of me was still arranging my life around her preferences. I stared down at the casserole dish for several seconds before sliding it back into the cabinet. The kitchen window fogged softly from the heat, while cold wind rattled branches outside. Somewhere in the neighborhood, children laughed loudly. I wondered if Daniel remembered how much I used to love this holiday. Probably not. Adult children rarely remember their mothers as people separate from motherhood itself. We become background comfort eventually. Reliable.
Permanent.
Easy to postpone. Around 3:30, my phone finally buzzed on the counter. My heart reacted instantly before logic could catch up. I wiped my hands quickly on a dish towel and reached for it. Daniel. A text message. Happy Thanksgiving, Mom. Hope you are having a relaxing day. That was all.
Non betasjen. No apology.
No acknowledgement that I was spending the holiday alone while he carved turkey somewhere else. I stared at the message until the words blurred together slightly. Then another notification appeared beneath it. A photo. Nicole had sent it to the family group chat. Everyone smiling around a perfectly decorated dining table. Her parents sat beside Daniel holding wine glasses while golden candlelight reflected warmly across crystal dishes and polished silverware. Nicole stood beside him with one manicured hand resting possessively against his shoulder. Daniel looked happy, comfortable, like he had already adjusted to a version of family that no longer included me. I zoomed in on the photo, without meaning to. There were 6 place settings visible at the table.
6.
Enough room for one more person. My chest tightened, unexpectedly. Not because I wanted fancy dinnerware or expensive wine or holiday perfection. I would have been happy sitting at the corner of the table eating store-bought rolls beside my son. But there had been space for me, and still they chose not to include me. That was the part that hurt most. Exclusion always cuts deeper when you realize it was deliberate. I set the phone face down slowly and turned back toward the sink. Before tears could fully form, the turkey timer beeped sharply at that exact moment, startling me. I laughed once under my breath because life has a cruel sense of timing sometimes. By evening, darkness settled early across the neighborhood, turning the windows into black mirrors reflecting my quiet dining room back at me. I carried my plate to the table alone while the television murmured softly from the living room. 1 plate, 1 fork, 1 glass of iced tea. The silence felt enormous. Halfway through dinner, another memory surfaced unexpectedly. Daniel, at 9 years old, sitting across from me at this same table after getting into a fight at school because another boy made fun of my second-hand winter coat. Nobody gets to disrespect my mom. He had snapped through angry little tears while Harold tried not to smile behind his napkin. I remembered hugging him afterward in the kitchen while snow fell outside. You will understand when you are older, I told him gently. Sometimes people disappoint us. Back then I thought I was teaching him kindness. I never imagined I was teaching myself survival. After dinner, I wrapped leftovers carefully into small containers, even though there was far too much food for one person. The refrigerator shelves looked crowded and lonely at the same time. I cleaned slowly, letting the warm water run over my hands while the dishwasher hummed quietly beside me. Every movement inside the house echoed now. Every cabinet closing. Every footstep. Every sigh. Loneliness has a way of making ordinary sounds feel louder. Around 8:30, I finally sat down in Harold's recliner with a blanket over my knees and the family photo album resting heavily in my lap. I had not opened it in months. Maybe longer. Dust clung lightly to the corners of the leather cover as I lifted it open beneath the warm yellow glow of the lamp. The first few pages showed Daniel as a baby wrapped in blue hospital blankets, while Harold held him with terrified pride written all over his face. Then birthdays, camping trips, Christmas mornings, science fairs, baseball uniforms 2 sizes too big. There was one photo from Daniel's college graduation where he hugged me so tightly my feet nearly lifted off the ground. On the back he wrote, "Everything I am is because of you." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Everything I am is because of you. Funny how children speak in forever language before life teaches them temporary behavior. Near the middle of the album, I found photos from the first Thanksgiving Nicole spent with us. She looked younger then, softer somehow. Her blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail while she helped me roll pie dough in the kitchen. I remembered how nervous she seemed meeting us for the first time. "I hope your family likes me," she whispered while Daniel carried groceries inside. "Oh, honey," I told her back then. "Once you love my son, you are family." I believed those words completely when I said them. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the exact moment I unknowingly handed someone else the keys to my own place in Daniel's life. My eyes drifted toward another photo tucked between pages. Daniel and Nicole dancing at their wedding reception beneath soft white lights, while Harold clapped proudly from our table nearby. Harold died 8 months after that picture was taken. Sometimes I think Daniel never truly recovered from losing his father. He just buried the grief under work, marriage, responsibility, and slowly stopped needing me because needing me reminded him of everything else he lost. The thought stayed with me while I closed the album gently and rested my hand against the worn leather cover. Outside, freezing rain tapped softly against the windows again, just like the night Nicole first asked for boundaries. I leaned back slowly into the recliner and stared at the dark reflection of myself in the glass. Then another realization settled quietly over me, colder and heavier than the others before it. Nicole had not simply entered Daniel's life. She had learned how to become the center of it. And somewhere along the way, my son allowed me to become optional. December arrived quietly after Thanksgiving, covering the neighborhood in thin layers of frost and long early sunsets that made the evenings feel endless. The Christmas decorations on other houses appeared one by one across the street while mine stayed packed inside dusty boxes in the garage longer than usual. For the first time in 40 years, I could not find the energy to decorate immediately. Harold always used to tease me about that. "You start Christmas before the turkey is even cold," he would laugh while untangling lights beside the fireplace. But this year the silence inside the house had become too noticeable. Decorations felt almost dishonest somehow. One Monday morning, while cold rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows, I stood staring at the unopened ornament boxes stacked near the garage door. My reflection looked tired in the small glass window above them. Not broken exactly, just worn thin from hoping too long. Around noon my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Nicole and I are hosting a holiday dinner next Saturday for coworkers and friends. Thought you might want to come by for a little while."
For a little while.
I read that part 3 separate times. Not "we would love to have you." Not "please come celebrate with us." Just "come by for a little while." Temporary. Managed. Like a guest stopping in at a hotel lobby. Still, my heart lifted anyway. That was the humiliating thing about motherhood. Even scraps of affection still felt valuable when they came from your child. Saturday evening arrived cold and windy, with icy rain streaking across the windshield while I drove 30 minutes across town toward Daniel and Nicole's neighborhood. Their subdivision looked like something from a holiday movie. Large white houses glowing warmly beneath strings of golden lights. Wreaths hanging perfectly on every door. Expensive SUVs lined neatly along driveways, while soft music drifted faintly from open front entrances. I sat in the car for a moment after parking, staring at Daniel's house through the rain-speckled windshield. The windows glowed amber against the dark December sky. Shadows moved inside. Laughter spilled faintly through the walls. Family. Warmth. Life continuing without me until I was briefly invited to observe it from the edges. I smoothed my dark wool coat carefully before walking up the front steps, carrying a glass pie dish wrapped in a red kitchen
Towel. Pumpkin pie.
Daniel's favorite since he was 6 years old. Nicole opened the door, wearing an elegant cream sweater dress and gold earrings that caught the warm light behind her. "Evelyn," she said brightly. "You made it." Made it. Like attendance had been uncertain. Inside, the house smelled like expensive candles and catered food. Soft jazz floated through hidden speakers while people in polished clothes stood laughing around wine glasses and charcuterie boards. Daniel appeared near the staircase seconds later. "Mom." His smile looked genuine for the first time in weeks, and suddenly my chest ached with relief. He kissed my cheek quickly before taking the pie from my hands. "You did not have to bring anything." "It is Christmas," I answered softly. "I always bring pie." For a moment things almost felt normal again. Then Nicole stepped beside him and adjusted his collar gently while talking to another guest without ever fully looking at me. Such a tiny movement, but intimate in a territorial kind of way. The sort of gesture that quietly says this person belongs to me now. I tried ignoring the feeling. Drinks are in the kitchen, Nicole said politely. Help yourself. The evening blurred strangely after that. I moved carefully through rooms filled with strangers discussing ski trips, investment properties, private schools, and wine tastings in Napa. Everyone seemed younger than me. Sharper somehow. Their laughter came easily while I stood near the edges of conversations smiling politely whenever someone remembered to include me. Daniel floated from group to group all night introducing clients and coworkers while Nicole played perfect hostess beside him. They looked beautiful together. Successful. Established. The kind of couple people admire at holiday parties. Several times I caught myself simply watching my son across the room. The way he laughed now. The way he stood straighter around Nicole's friends. The way he barely looked in my direction unless spoken to first. Around 8:30, I finally wandered toward the dining area searching for somewhere quieter. That was when I heard Nicole speaking from the hallway just beyond the kitchen. Honestly, boundaries were the best thing we ever did. She laughed softly. Another woman answered. Mothers can be intense. Nicole lowered her voice slightly, but I still heard every word. Daniel used to feel guilty constantly. His mother expected weekly dinners, constant calls, all of it. A small pause followed. Then came the sentence that stopped me cold. I finally helped him understand that marriage means building your own family, not staying emotionally attached to your mother forever. The women laughed lightly together after that. Not cruel laughter exactly. Worse. Casual laughter. Comfortable laughter. The kind people use when discussing something they fully believe is reasonable. I stood completely still beside the hallway wall while the blood drained slowly from my face. Emotionally attached to your mother forever. Was that truly how she saw me? Not loving. Not supportive. Not family. Just emotionally attached. Like I was some unhealthy habit Daniel needed to outgrow. Nicole? Another woman asked softly. Do you think she realizes what is happening? Nicole answered immediately. No. Evelyn still thinks she is the center of his life. More laughter. My fingers tightened around the edge of my handbag until the leather creaked softly. Something deep inside me shifted then. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Just a quiet, painful rearranging of truth. Because for months I had convinced myself this situation was complicated. Miscommunication. Stress. Marriage adjustments. But standing there listening to my daughter-in-law casually explain my removal from my own son's life, like a successful home renovation project, I finally understood something clearly. This had never been accidental. Nicole did not merely want boundaries. She wanted replacement. Footsteps approached suddenly from the kitchen, and I stepped back before anyone noticed me standing there. My heart hammered painfully against my ribs while I forced my face calm again. Seconds later, Daniel appeared carrying 2 wine glasses. Mom, he smiled. There you are. I was looking for you. Looking for me. The irony nearly broke my heart. Just needed a quieter corner for a minute, I answered carefully. He nodded distractedly while glancing over his shoulder toward the living room where Nicole stood entertaining guests beneath sparkling Christmas lights. Everything okay? He asked. Such a simple question. Such a dangerous one. I looked at my son carefully then. Really looked at him. At the tiredness around his eyes. The tension hidden beneath his polished smile. The subtle way his attention kept drifting toward Nicole every few seconds, as if checking whether she approved of him. Maybe he was happy. Maybe he was trapped. Maybe both things were true at once. Yes, I said quietly. Everything is very clear now. He frowned slightly like he did not understand what I meant, but before he could ask further, Nicole called his name from across the room. Instantly, his attention shifted toward her voice. Instantly. Coming, he answered. Then back to me again. I will check on you later, okay? But he never did. An hour later, I slipped out quietly while snow began falling in soft, thin sheets beneath the streetlights outside. Nobody noticed immediately. Nobody stopped me at the door. Driving home through icy roads and glowing neighborhoods, I kept hearing Nicole's voice repeating inside my head. I finally helped him understand. The windshield wipers moved steadily back and forth while snow collected along the edges of the road. And somewhere between one red traffic light and the next, I realized I had spent months asking the wrong question. The real issue was never whether Nicole disliked me. The real question was why my son felt comfortable letting another person slowly erase me from his life while standing beside her the entire time. The week before Christmas, Daniel finally called me without Nicole in the background, and somehow that alone told me something was wrong. It was nearly 7 in the evening when the phone rang. Outside, freezing rain tapped steadily against the windows while wind bent the bare tree branches across the front yard. I had been sitting at the kitchen table sorting old receipts beside a half-finished cup of tea when his name lit up the screen. For one strange second, I simply stared at it. Then I answered carefully.
Iswa?
Silence lingered briefly on the other end before he spoke. Hey, Mom. His voice sounded tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally worn down in a way I recognized immediately because I had heard that exact exhaustion in Harold during the final difficult years of our marriage, when work stress and grief started swallowing parts of him he did not know how to talk about. Everything okay? I asked softly. Another pause. Then a sigh.
Yeah.
I just wanted to check in.
Check in.
Such formal language for a son calling his mother. Still, I held onto the conversation carefully, like something fragile. How have you been? He asked. I almost laughed at the question because the honest answer felt too large for the tiny, polite space he created for it. How had I been? Lonely. Humiliated. Slowly erased from his life, while pretending not to notice. But instead I said, oh, quiet around here. I heard movement in the background. A door shutting softly somewhere. Then Daniel lowered his voice slightly. Mom, Nicole thinks maybe things have felt tense lately. I closed my eyes slowly. There it was again. Not Daniel thinks. Nicole thinks. Even now he could not speak without filtering his thoughts through her first. Have they? I asked calmly. Felt tense. He hesitated long enough to answer the question without words. She feels like you do not really like her. The sentence settled heavily between us while rain streaked down the dark kitchen windows beside me. I leaned back slowly in my chair and stared at the small Christmas wreath hanging crookedly near the pantry door. Daniel, I said carefully, your wife has spent the last year making me feel like I am a problem that needs managing. That is not fair, he answered quickly, though his voice lacked conviction. Nicole is only trying to protect our marriage. Protect it from what? I wanted to ask. Sunday dinners? Phone calls? Love? But I stayed quiet because I suddenly understood something painful. This conversation was not happening because Daniel wanted understanding. It was happening because Nicole wanted reassurance. Your father and I never asked you to choose between us, I said softly after a moment. Nobody is asking me to choose, he replied immediately. Too immediately. The kind of fast defensive answer people give when they are already living inside the accusation. Outside, headlights slid across the wet street while thunder rolled faintly somewhere far away. I rubbed my fingers slowly against the warm ceramic mug beside me. Then, why does it feel like every time she is uncomfortable, I disappear a little more from your life? Silence again. Long enough this time that my chest tightened. Mom, he sighed heavily. You are making this harder than it needs to be. The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel. Because they sounded rehearsed. Like something repeated often enough to become familiar. I picture Nicole saying those exact words to him in their bedroom after another conversation about boundaries and emotional space. I see, I whispered. That is not what I meant, he said quickly, but I could hear frustration creeping beneath his voice now. I just think everybody would be happier if things were less emotionally intense all the time. Emotionally intense. I stared at the dark reflection of myself in the kitchen window while those words echoed inside me. Was grief emotionally intense? Was loneliness? Was missing my son after losing my husband? At what point did normal maternal love become classified as emotional inconvenience? Daniel, I asked quietly, when was the last time you called me because you actually wanted to talk to me and not because Nicole thought you should? The silence after that question stretched painfully long. I could hear his breathing faintly through the phone. Then finally, quietly, he said, "That is not fair either." But he still did not answer. And that was answer enough. Something inside me shifted again then. The same cold, quiet feeling I experienced standing in that hallway at his Christmas party listening to Nicole explain my removal from his life, like a healthy lifestyle improvement. Except this time the realization felt sharper, because it came directly from him. My son was no longer protecting my feelings. He was managing them. "I think maybe we both need some space," Daniel said carefully. After another pause, there it was, the final little crack running through whatever remained between us. I looked around my kitchen slowly while he spoke. The old clock Harold repaired twice before refusing to replace it because he loved the sound. The faded recipe cards tucked beside the refrigerator. The small ceramic snowman Daniel painted for me in 3rd grade that still sat near the stove every Christmas. This house contained my entire adult life. Every sacrifice, every memory, every version of motherhood I had ever been. And somehow, the little boy who once cried whenever I left him at kindergarten now needed space from me. "If that is what you want," I answered quietly. "It is not forever," he added quickly. "We just need healthier dynamics." Healthier dynamics. I almost smiled at the absurdity of hearing my own child discuss our relationship like a corporate conflict resolution seminar. "Of course," I whispered. "I understand." But for the first time, I actually did understand. Not what Nicole wanted. Not what marriage had changed inside him. I understood something about myself. I had spent months clinging desperately to the version of Daniel that no longer existed. The son who called me first after every success. The son who stopped by just to sit in the kitchen and complain about work while eating leftovers from the refrigerator. The son who once promised after Harold died, "You will never be alone, Mom." That son was gone. Maybe not completely. Maybe not intentionally. But gone all the same. "I should go," Daniel said quietly. "Nicole is waiting for dinner." Of course she was. "Good night, sweetheart," I answered automatically. He hesitated again before speaking. "Good night, Mom." The call ended softly.
No shouting. No dramatica enfrentación.
Just silence returning once more. I sat motionless at the kitchen table while rain continued tapping against the windows. The tea beside me had gone completely cold. Somewhere upstairs the heater clicked on with a low mechanical hum. The house suddenly felt enormous around me. Too large for one person carrying this much quiet grief. My eyes drifted toward the refrigerator where Christmas cards from neighbors and distant relatives hung beneath magnets, most addressed to Evelyn Carter and family. I stared at those words for a long time. Family. Such a beautiful word when people are holding on to you. Such a brutal one when they are slowly letting go. That night, before going upstairs, I walked through the darkened living room and stopped beside the framed wedding photo of Daniel and Nicole above the fireplace. Candlelight from the nearby lamp flickered softly across the glass. Daniel looked so happy in the picture, so hopeful. I reached out slowly and touched the frame with my fingertips. "I would have shared you willingly," I whispered into the quiet room. "If only she had not needed to take you away from me to feel loved." Then I turned off the lamp and stood there in darkness for a moment longer, finally realizing something that terrified me almost as much as losing my son. I was beginning to stop chasing after him. After that phone call, something inside me finally grew tired of waiting. Not angry, not dramatic, just exhausted in a quiet bone-deep way that settled over me during the final weeks of December like fresh snow covering a frozen yard. For the first few days, I still reached for my phone automatically every morning expecting some message from Daniel. Old habits do not disappear overnight. They fade slowly, painfully, like the last lights left on in a house everyone else already abandoned. But then Christmas came and went with only a brief text from him at noon. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Love you." 3 words at the end like an afterthought stitched onto obligation. I stared at the message while sitting alone beside my undecorated tree, the television glowing softly in the dark living room. Outside, snow drifted lazily beneath the streetlights while laughter from neighboring houses floated faintly through the cold night air. "Love you." Funny how people can say those words while actively creating lives where you no longer fit inside them. I typed, "Love you too, sweetheart," before setting the phone aside gently. No tears came this time. That was the strange part. The sadness remained, but something sharper had started replacing desperation. By January, the holiday decorations disappeared across the neighborhood, one house at a time. Winter settled in fully after that. Gray skies, bare trees, long silent afternoons stretching endlessly through the house. But instead of drowning inside the quiet the way I had been for months, I slowly began changing small things. One Tuesday morning I woke before sunrise and realized I had not checked my phone for Daniel's messages first thing in nearly 3 days. The realization startled me. The old version of myself would have considered that impossible. I made coffee slowly while pale morning light crept across the kitchen floorboards. The house still felt lonely, but not abandoned anymore. There is a difference between being alone and being unwanted. I was finally beginning to understand that. Around 10 o'clock that morning, I drove downtown and signed up for a watercolor class at the community center 2 blocks from the library. The woman behind the desk smiled warmly while handing me paperwork. "Have you painted before?" she asked. "Not since college," I admitted. Saying that aloud felt strange, like discovering a younger version of myself still existed somewhere beneath decades of motherhood and marriage. "Then this will be fun," she said brightly. Fun. I could not remember the last time somebody associated me with that word instead of responsibility. The class met every Thursday afternoon in a sunny room overlooking the park. The first week I nearly canceled 3 separate times before going inside. Most of the students were around my age. Retired teachers, widows, quiet women carrying their own invisible grief into the room every week beneath oversized sweaters and polite smiles. Nobody asked complicated questions there. Nobody needed emotional explanations. We simply painted. Trees, winter landscapes, ceramic bowls filled with oranges, tiny ordinary things. And somehow, for 2 hours every Thursday, I stopped waiting for my son to remember me. One afternoon after class, a woman named Patricia invited me to join her and 2 others for coffee at a small cafe nearby. Warm lights glowed softly against brick walls while snow melted along the sidewalks outside. I almost declined automatically out of habit. Then I heard myself say yes. We sat near the window drinking cappuccinos while Patricia complained about her dachshund chewing expensive shoes and another woman described her disastrous online dating experience after 60. I laughed harder that afternoon than I had in months. Real laughter. Not the careful, polite kind I used around Daniel and Nicole lately. Driving home afterward, I realized something uncomfortable. I had spent so much emotional energy trying to remain important in my son's life that I stopped building one of my own. The realization stayed with me for weeks afterward. Slowly, almost without noticing, my routines began changing. I stopped cooking large Sunday dinners for people who no longer came. I stopped leaving entire weekends emotionally open in case Daniel suddenly decided to visit. I stopped rereading old text messages searching for hidden affection between the lines. Instead, I painted, read novels beside the fireplace, took long walks through the botanical gardens downtown whenever weather allowed. One cold February morning, I even cut my hair shorter for the first time in 20 years. The stylist turned the chair toward the mirror afterward and smiled. "You look lighter," she said. Maybe I did. Daniel noticed eventually, though not in the way I expected. It started with little things. I no longer answered every call immediately. I stopped texting first. When he canceled plans one Saturday because Nicole was not feeling social, I simply replied, "No problem. Maybe another time."
No guilt. No pleading.
No emotional explanation attached underneath. A week later, he called unexpectedly while I was halfway through lunch with Patricia and another woman from painting class. The phone buzzed against the restaurant table while sunlight streamed warmly through the windows around us. "Daniel." I stared at the screen briefly before silencing it and returning to my soup. Patricia raised an eyebrow playfully. "Important. Not urgent," I answered calmly. And for the first time, it truly was not. Later that evening, I returned his call while folding laundry upstairs. "Hey, Mom," he answered immediately. "Everything okay?" I smiled faintly, hearing the concern in his voice. Of course.
Why?
You did not answer earlier.
Such a small thing.
Yet somehow he sounded unsettled by it. I was out with friends, I replied simply. Silence followed for half a second too long. Friends. From painting class. Oh. More silence. I could almost hear him trying to rearrange his understanding of me in real time. Mothers are not supposed to become less available. We are supposed to remain standing exactly where our children left us emotionally, ready whenever they return needing comfort. That is nice, he finally said. But his voice sounded distracted now. Curious. Yeah, I answered softly while pairing socks together. It really is. Another long pause stretched between us. Then Daniel asked something that revealed more than he probably intended. You have been busy lately?
Busy.
The word almost made me smile, because what he really meant was different. You seem different lately. Less reachable. Less waiting.
¿Y qué si hey? He answered honestly.
Outside the bedroom window, late afternoon sunlight glowed gold against fresh snow covering the backyard. Everything looked softer beneath winter light. That is good, he said carefully. But again, he did not sound entirely comfortable saying it. We talked another few minutes about harmless things after that. Weather. Property taxes. My car needing new tires soon. Surface conversation. Safe conversation. Then, before hanging up, he said quietly, Nicole says we should all do dinner sometime. I stopped folding laundry for a moment after hearing that. Months ago, those words would have filled me with desperate relief. Now, they simply sounded strategic, managed, like somebody noticing distance shifting in the wrong direction. Maybe, I answered calmly. Another silence. You busy next Sunday? He asked. I looked down at the small watercolor painting drying beside my desk near the window. Blue mountains beneath pale winter skies. Imperfect but peaceful. Patricia invited me to an art fair downtown that afternoon. The old version of me would have canceled immediately for even half a chance to see Daniel. But that woman was disappearing now. Actually, I said gently, I already have plans. The silence after that felt different than before. Not tense exactly.
Surprised.
Like my son was suddenly realizing I had continued becoming a person even while he was busy reducing me into an obligation. Oh, he answered quietly. Okay then. After we hung up, I stood alone in the bedroom listening to the soft hum of the heater while evening settled slowly across the snow-covered yard outside. Then I returned to folding laundry calmly, because for the first time in a very long while, my entire emotional world no longer revolved around whether my son chose to include me inside his. By early March, the snow had finally started melting along the sidewalks, leaving behind muddy grass and pale patches of winter that refused to disappear completely. The air smelled different too. Softer somehow. Like the world itself was slowly exhaling after months of holding tension in its lungs. I noticed the change one Saturday morning while walking through the botanical gardens downtown with Patricia. Tiny white flowers pushed through damp soil near the stone pathways while sunlight filtered weakly through bare branches overhead. You seem happier lately, Patricia said casually as we passed a small fountain surrounded by tulips beginning to bloom. I almost argued with her automatically. Mothers like me are trained to downplay our own healing because somewhere along the way we learn that happiness without our children feels selfish. But instead I just smiled faintly. Quieter. I corrected gently. I think I finally feel quieter. And it was true. The grief had not disappeared. I still missed Daniel every single day in ways I could not fully explain to anyone else. But the desperation was fading. I no longer spent entire evenings replaying conversations searching for hidden signs that my son still needed me. I no longer stared at my phone every Sunday waiting to see whether I mattered that week. My life had slowly begun expanding again around the empty spaces he left behind. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, everything shifted. I had just returned home from watercolor class carrying a canvas still damp with blue paint when my phone rang in the kitchen. Daniel. I set my keys down carefully beside the fruit bowl before answering.
Sir?
His breathing sounded uneven immediately. Mom, are you home? Something inside me tightened.
Yes.
What happened? A pause followed. Then quietly, almost embarrassed, he said, "Can I come by?" 40 minutes later, his car pulled into the driveway beneath cold spring rain. I watched from the front window while he sat motionless behind the steering wheel for several seconds before finally stepping out. The moment he walked toward the house, I realized how tired he looked. Not ordinary work, stress tired. Hollow tired. His navy dress shirt hung wrinkled beneath a rain-soaked coat, and dark circles shadowed his eyes in a way I had never seen before. He looked older suddenly. Smaller somehow. I opened the door before he reached it. "Daniel." For 1 second, he simply stood there in silence, while rain dripped from his hair onto the porch steps. Then he asked quietly, "Can I come in?" The house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner when he stepped inside.
Familiar smells.
Safe smells. He glanced around the entryway slowly, as if noticing details he had not paid attention to in years. Harold's old umbrella stand. The framed lake photograph near the staircase. The small ceramic bowl where Daniel used to throw his baseball cards after school when he was 12 years old. "You changed your hair," he said finally. I touched the shorter silver layers automatically. "A few weeks ago." He nodded distractedly while removing his wet coat. "It looks nice." I led him toward the kitchen where warm afternoon light glowed softly through rain-streaked windows. The same kitchen where he once said doing homework while I cooked spaghetti on Tuesday nights. The same kitchen where Nicole first started discussing boundaries like they were construction projects requiring blueprints and removal plans. Funny how rooms remember every version of your life at once. "Coffee?" I asked. "Please." His voice cracked slightly on the word. While the coffee brewed, silence settled heavily between us. Not hostile silence this time. Fragile silence. The kind people carry when they are standing near truths they do not yet know how to say aloud. Finally, Daniel rubbed both hands across his face tiredly and stared down at the kitchen table. "Nicole moved out last week." I froze with the coffee mug still in my hands.
What?
He laughed once softly under his breath, but there was no humor in it. "Apparently, she has been unhappy for a while." Rain tapped steadily against the windows while the machine hissed quietly beside us. "Daniel." I sat down across from him slowly. "What happened?" He stared toward the dark backyard beyond the kitchen window. "I lost the Henderson account in February. Biggest client at the firm." His jaw tightened slightly. Everything kind of spiraled after that. I listened quietly while he spoke. Budget stress. Constant arguments. Nicole accusing him of becoming emotionally unavailable. Daniel sleeping in his office some nights trying to repair damage at work while his marriage quietly fractured around him. Then came the sentence that settled heavily inside my chest. She said she feels like she married potential instead of stability.
He laughed bitterly this time.
Can you believe that? I could actually. Nicole loved control more than loyalty. Stability more than sacrifice. But I did not say that aloud. Instead, I asked softly, "Where is she now?" "Staying with a friend downtown." He wrapped both hands around the coffee mug I placed in front of him. "She says she needs space to think."
Space.
The word nearly made me flinch. Funny how the people demanding the most emotional distance are usually the first ones to leave entirely once life stops feeling comfortable. Daniel looked exhausted sitting there beneath the warm kitchen lights. For one dangerous moment, old instincts rushed through me automatically. I wanted to comfort him, protect him, tell him everything would be okay the way I used to after childhood heartbreaks and failed college exams and nights he came home devastated after his father died.
But something stopped me this time.
Not cruelty.
Clarity.
Because I suddenly realized my son had not come here simply because he missed me. He came because the center of his emotional world disappeared, and he expected to find me still waiting exactly where he left me. I did not know where else to go, he admitted quietly after a long silence. There it was. Honest at last. I stirred cream slowly into my coffee, while studying him carefully across the table. The little boy inside him still existed somewhere beneath all the weakness and compromise and emotional cowardice. I could see flashes of it around his eyes sometimes, around the corners of his mouth when he looked frightened. But he was not a little boy anymore. He was a grown man sitting inside the consequences of choices he spent years pretending were harmless. "I am sorry you are hurting," I said finally. His eyes lifted toward mine immediately, almost surprised by the calmness in my voice. "Mom, I know things have been complicated between us lately."
Complicated.
Such a gentle word for abandonment. "Have they?" I asked quietly.
He looked down again.
Nicole always felt like he stopped himself mid-sentence, then sighed heavily. "I do not know." Everything became exhausting. I leaned back slowly in my chair while rain continued falling softly outside. Months ago, I would have rushed to reassure him, to tell him none of it was his fault, to protect him from the discomfort of fully facing what happened between us. But that woman was gone now, too. "You stopped choosing me long before Nicole left," I said calmly. The words hung heavily in the warm kitchen air between us. Daniel blinked slowly, like the sentence physically hurt him. "Mom? No."
Interrupta shuffly.
"You do not get to come back here pretending this only started when your marriage got difficult." Silence filled the room completely after that. Even the rain outside seemed quieter suddenly. Daniel stared down at his untouched coffee while emotion flickered across his face, too quickly to fully name.
Guilt. Shame.
Exhaustion. Maybe all three. And sitting there across from my son beneath soft kitchen light, while spring rain washed winter away outside, I realized something strange. I still loved him deeply. But for the first time in my entire life, loving him no longer meant losing myself. Spring arrived fully by April, washing away the last traces of winter from the neighborhood, one warm rainstorm at a time. Tulips bloomed along sidewalks. Trees filled slowly, with pale green leaves. Open windows carried the smell of fresh-cut grass and distant barbecues through quiet suburban streets that had looked lifeless only weeks earlier. And somehow, my life had begun changing with the seasons too. The house no longer felt like a waiting room. That was the first thing I noticed. The silence inside it had transformed. Months ago, it sounded abandoned, heavy, aching with absence. But now the quiet felt peaceful most mornings. Intentional.
Mine.
I painted regularly, met Patricia and the others for coffee twice a week. Started volunteering Wednesday afternoons at the library reading stories to children whose parents worked late shifts. Tiny ordinary things. But they stitched pieces of me back together slowly, in ways I had not expected. Daniel called more often after that rainy afternoon in my kitchen. At first the conversations felt uncertain, cautious in the way people speak after finally realizing damage exists between them. Sometimes he sounded exhausted, sometimes ashamed, occasionally angry in misplaced directions because pain searches desperately for somewhere softer to land. Nicole still had not returned home by then. According to Daniel, she wanted clarity about the future. Another carefully polished phrase hiding a much uglier truth underneath. One Sunday afternoon, he came by unexpectedly carrying grocery bags and looking more rested than before. Sunlight streamed warmly through the kitchen windows while birds chirped outside like the entire world had decided to move forward regardless of human heartbreak. "I've brought lunch," he said awkwardly while setting bags on the counter. "Turkey sandwiches from that deli you like." I smiled faintly. "You remembered." He looked down immediately after that. Guilt still lived close beneath his skin these days. We ate quietly on the back patio, while soft spring wind stirred the wind chimes Harold installed years ago. The yard looked beautiful again after winter. Yellow daffodils lined the fence beside fresh green grass. Daniel stared out toward the garden for a long time before finally speaking. "I have been thinking a lot lately." I sipped iced tea slowly without interrupting him. "About everything," he added quietly.
About you, Dad.
Nicole. All of it. The wind carried the smell of lilacs through the yard while somewhere nearby a lawn mower hummed steadily. Ordinary suburban sounds. Safe sounds. "I think I spent years trying to keep everybody comfortable," he admitted. "And somehow I ended up hurting the person who loved me the most." The words settled softly between us. Honest words at last. Not polished therapy language. Not excuses wrapped in corporate emotional vocabulary. Just truth. I looked at my son carefully then. He seemed different lately, too. Not fixed. Not transformed overnight. but humbled in a way pain often humbles people after comfort stops protecting them from themselves.
Why?
I asked gently. Daniel frowned slightly. Why what? Why was it easier to disappoint me than disappoint her? His eyes lowered immediately toward the untouched half of his sandwich. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, quietly, because I knew you would forgive me. There it was. The real answer. Not cruelty. Not hatred. Assumption. Children raised inside unconditional love sometimes grow careless with it because they cannot imagine life without access to it. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. That is a very dangerous thing to assume about someone, Daniel. He nodded slowly. I know that now. We sat quietly after that while warm sunlight drifted across the patio table inch by inch. Then Daniel surprised me by asking something I never expected to hear. Were you lonely? The question sounded almost childlike, leaving his mouth.
Small.
Frightened. Like some part of him already knew the answer, but still hoped reality might be kinder than imagination. I stared out at Harold's garden while deciding how honest to be. Yes, I answered softly. Very. His face tightened immediately. Mom, but loneliness was not the worst part. I continued gently. The worst part was watching my own son slowly treat me like somebody he needed permission to love openly. Silence followed. Heavy. This time. Daniel rubbed one hand across his eyes and looked away toward the yard. I did not realize how bad it became. That is the problem with emotional distance, I said quietly. The person creating it usually notices last. A bird landed briefly near the garden fence before flying away again into bright spring air. Daniel watched it absent-mindedly, while speaking almost to himself. Nicole used to say I needed stronger boundaries with you. I smiled sadly. Boundaries are healthy, sweetheart. Erasing someone is not. He looked at me sharply after that. Maybe because it was the first time I had spoken clearly, without softening reality, to protect him from guilt. Do you hate her? He asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it seriously before answering. Nicole. Her polished smiles. Her careful language. The way she slowly turned my son into somebody emotionally unavailable while convincing him it was maturity. No, I said finally. I think she was afraid. Daniel frowned. Afraid of what? Of not being the most important person in your life. The wind shifted softly through the trees above us. And instead of learning how to share love, she tried to control access to it. He stared down at the table quietly after that. I let her. Yes, I answered honestly. You did.
No anger.
No raised voice. Just truth sitting plainly between us in warm afternoon light. Daniel swallowed hard before speaking again. I am sorry. Such simple words. Yet I could hear how much they cost him to say honestly for the first time. I studied my son carefully then. The little boy who used to run into my arms after nightmares. The grieving young man who cried against my shoulder at Harold's funeral. The husband who became emotionally weak trying to keep peace inside a marriage built on quiet control. Every version of him still existed somewhere inside the man sitting across from me now. I know, I whispered. And strangely, I meant that too. A few weeks later, Nicole officially filed for separation. Daniel told me over the phone one rainy evening while I painted by the living room window. His voice sounded calmer than before. Sad but no longer. Drowning. How are you holding up? I asked. He paused before answering. Honestly, I think I spent years building my entire life around keeping somebody happy who only loved me conditionally. I closed my eyes briefly after hearing that because sometimes life teaches people lessons their parents never could. That realization hurts, I said softly. Yeah, he admitted. But I think I understand you better now. After the call ended, I sat quietly beside the rain-speckled window watching headlights glow against wet streets outside. Somewhere during the past year, everything between Daniel and me had changed permanently. Not magically repaired. Not returned to what it once was. Some wounds never disappear completely. But something healthier had finally replaced the desperate imbalance we used to call closeness. He no longer stood at the center of my emotional survival. And because of that, I could finally love him clearly again. A month later, on a warm evening in May, Daniel came over for dinner. Just us.
No tensión. No negociations.
No invisible permission needed from anyone else. We ate pasta on the patio while sunset painted the sky gold and pink above the backyard trees. At one point, Daniel looked at me quietly and asked, "Do you think things between us will ever fully heal?" I thought carefully before answering. Then I smiled softly and reached for my wine glass. "Healing is not pretending nothing broke," I told him gently. "It is learning how to move forward without abandoning yourself again." He nodded slowly, like he would spend years thinking about that sentence afterward. Maybe he would. Maybe that was part of growing older too. Understanding that love without self-respect eventually turns into grief. The sun slipped lower behind the trees while warm evening light wrapped softly across the yard Harold once cared for so lovingly. And sitting there across from my son beneath a peaceful spring sky, I finally understood what I did next after losing him. I stopped begging to be chosen. I chose myself instead. And somehow, that was the very thing that finally taught my son how to find his way back to me.